Alessandra, how is the weather in Cusco today?
It was beautiful. It was sunny, blue skies against the green Andes Mountains. It was just really nice day. Yeah. Where are you at again, Aaron?
I'm in Oakland, California.
Oh, also a beautiful place.
Yeah, it's been incredible the last week, but also scary. I think we're all anticipating wildfires again, and it's just a weird new normal. Um, let's see. All right, I think we can start now. And I want to thank everyone again for their patience. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the New Energy Nexus webinar series, A Green Tomorrow, The Road to Climate FinTech Innovation. This webinar takes place every 2 weeks and highlights entrepreneurs, innovators, technologies working in climate FinTech from around the world. And actually last session, we had my colleague Yafu Zhao, who interviewed Miotech based in China. And on the second episode, I am really excited to host Nori co-founder and director of corporate development, Alexander Garcia. And we'll be discussing how Nori erases your carbon footprint today. And just a little bit of context on New Energy Nexus and the work that we've been up to. So we published what was called the Climate FinTech Report in December, researching the intersection of digital financial technology and decarbonization. And this year we are building and rolling out accelerator programming in a number of regions around this topic. And one of those topics is carbon removal marketplaces, where Nori has thrived. So without further ado, Alessandra, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you first came to create Nori.
So I'm not the only co-founder, as I did not create Nori. I did it with a team of people. So my name is Alexander Garcia. I'm originally from Miami, Florida. I think I was 15 when I found out about climate change and what we called it global warming at the time. And a couple of years later on the Science Channel, I saw Klaus Lackner from Columbia University, who was there at the time, talking about direct air capture machines that could suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. So since I was 17, about 16 years ago, I wanted to do that. I went to Columbia, I studied with him. He's actually now an advisor to Nori. And I always wanted to remove CO2 from the atmosphere to address global warming. And I had met one of my colleagues and co-founders, Christoph at the time, and met Paul. Like your background is actually really great, because like that idea of these networks and these nodes just randomly connecting. And that's what I think about when we all kind of connect in that way. And I found my coworkers or my co-founders through the desire to create a company around carbon removal. And not just a company around carbon removal, but something that would be significant to scale carbon removal at the scale that we need in order to mitigate and reverse climate change. So we're trying to be super ambitious. Our tagline is reversing climate change. We have a podcast called Reversing Climate Change, but we don't say that as a way of saying we're going to do that. We're like Uber, like for drivers, but if our drivers were removers of carbon. So we're just this mechanism to help incentivize global scale carbon removal, so that this is a global effort with many different people being involved.
Awesome. Thank you for the context. And I guess just sort of diving into the work that you guys do today, on your website, you help people and businesses buy carbon removed from the atmosphere to help reverse climate change. So sort of break it down for us into basics. How does that work if someone goes to your website?
Yeah, I mean, the website's pretty straightforward. We have this retail page where anybody can pay for, a ton or up to 400 tons of carbon removal services. We represent every ton by an NRT, a Nori carbon removal ton. The C in that is silent, but it represents 1 ton of CO2 removed from the atmosphere and stored somewhere else for a minimum of 10 years in a terrestrial reserve. It's the technical definition. So it's very different from other offsets, like any offset that might avoid emitting carbon into the atmosphere, like renewable energy credits, or RECs, things like that, or anything that reduces CO2 output. People might give credits or create carbon credits for that. That's not what we do. We believe in only creating credits right now for doing a good service, which is removing CO2 and storing it. And so businesses can view projects currently. Perfect, thank you. They can view that's a perfect little description or illustration of what I was describing. So instead of paying people to do less of a bad thing, paying them to do a good thing, which is to clean up the mess of our emissions. So anyways, businesses can view, or individuals can view, projects currently available on the website and choose to support those projects. There's only one project at a time. I can get into why that is, but it's essentially a first in, first out queue, a FIFO queue for the NRTs, which represent, again, carbon removal. And they're currently selling for $15 a ton. Nori charges 50% transaction fee on top of that. And we're very transparent about this pricing and where the money goes. So as opposed to pretty vague, opaque options currently available in other carbon offset markets or registries, you know who's getting paid. So if you go to nori.com, you could see the current supplier. You would click on his or her profile page. Right now, we're working with farmers. So farmers who are changing the way they manage their land can actually reverse climate change. So if you guys don't know, a third of global carbon emissions come from how we're growing our food, tilling the soil, etc. It's a third of our global emissions. But our croplands can actually be a sink of carbon, meaning if we change the way that we farm, where we protect the soil, we don't disturb the soil is then able to grow more and more organic matter through photosynthesis, sugars, etc. And that's this natural process of carbon removal.
So in this sort of world now where we're hearing a lot of noise around carbon offsetting and carbon removal, can you just tell us a little bit more about why it's so important to be specific in the terminology and the work that you do in this space? Why are removals being prioritized by Nori above or other offsets or avoidances?
Yeah, well, in terms of, let me see if I understand you correctly. It's your question, like, why is it important to be specific with removals versus reductions or avoidances?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, we're emitting what, like 40 billion tons, or 35, almost 40 billion tons, or gigatons, I think it's the same, of CO2 every year. And we have, since the Industrial Revolution, emitted so much that we've gone from 280 parts per million, it's essentially a measurement of how much CO2 is in the atmosphere, to over 420. And if you guys have not heard of an organization called 350.org, it was was founded by Bill McKibben, and the idea was like, we can't get over 350. And well, we're way above that now, right? We're almost 100 parts per million above that. So that means if you're tracking a graph of how much we're emitting, and you guys remember basic calculus, in order to calculate how much was emitted under that, it's the area under that curve. And so we need to remove somewhere between 1.5 to 2 trillion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere to go back to 300 parts per million. So reducing your emissions is not going to get you there. Like, you have to bring that curve back down. And the only way to do that, the only way, is to remove more CO2 than you're emitting. So that means when we're talking about climate change, we should all be aware of what's helpful and in what ways. It's not saying that, hey, here's a toolbox, only my hammer is helpful. Like, hammer is not helpful for screws. You need to know when to use a hammer, when to use a screwdriver, etc. So part of the global process for mitigating climate change is high level 2 things: emitting less, so do your reductions, avoid emitting, etc. And then remove the rest and remove more, right? So emit less, remove the rest. And those 2 things are key parts to the solution. no one is like less important, because it makes it really difficult to start removing at high capacities when you're continuously emitting. So don't let it run away from you, your emissions. Mm-hmm. And this is why there's a distinction there. So Nori was founded specifically to grow the scale of carbon removal globally occurring throughout the world in order to meet that 1.5 trillion ton goal to reverse climate change.
Super helpful and interesting. So emit less, remove the rest. And with Nori helping with that second piece, I was looking at buying some removals on the site. It costs about $15 right now for a Nori carbon removal ton, an NRT. And if, as an average American, I emit 16 tons per year, hypothetically, that means $240 would make my annual carbon footprint removed. So how do we get more people to make that purchase and to be willing to remove their carbon?
That's a really good question. So let me back up for a moment and say, you need to speak to people's motivations. And part of it is, what's wonderful, finally, is that people, for the most part, are pretty aware of climate change. I mean, right now I'm living in South America, I'm living in Peru, and people know what climate change is, right? Like, it's a thing. Whether or not people have the capacity or the resources to do anything about it is a different thing. And getting people to act on it, getting people to act on climate change by paying, say, to remove their yearly emissions is a storytelling thing, but I think it has to come from education. So continuous global education and increasing the literacy, the climate literacy of our societies is important. And then also providing some type of service that does the really good storytelling of like, gives you agency. Hey, here are things you can do. Because I think part of the problem, at least at the time when we founded the company about 3.5 years ago, was people were very doom and gloom about climate change, but there was like nothing you could do about it. It was like, okay, great, I'm on a sinking ship. You're not even telling me how I can grab a bucket and throw the excess water out and how we can, there's no plan. And now what's so wonderful is we have a lot of really cool climate tech startups coming up on the scene who are solving different parts of the problem. And we're all, I think, a team, a crew on the same ship. I'm like, here's the things that we're going to do. We're going to start giving people options on what to do. For example, I keep thinking of one of our partners, Joro Tech. They allow any type of person to sign up, connect their credit card, and then they analyze your credit card usage and associate like a carbon footprint with it. And it's all private, and your data is protected. But then they give you a carbon footprint, like this is how much you're emitting, and then they help connect you with offset providers like Nori, et cetera. So I think that to answer your question roundabout is that there are different many ways that people want to engage in this story. And the point is to continue telling that story and giving people or showing them there is something they can do. Before, and three years ago, this really wasn't an option. Like I said, we were just like doom and gloom. What do we do now? And I think Nori and Joro's and all the other climate tech startups are trying to provide, hey, here's agency, here's something you can do.
I really like that you brought up Joro and the way it works, and also just sort of this collective effort from climate tech and climate fintech, I guess is how I'd maybe consider both you and Joro, helping us to spend money in a way that is decarbonizing. And I actually signed up for Joro a couple of weeks ago, went through the process, connected my credit card. I think it was $22 to offset my last month, which surprised me. I thought it was going to be more, but I suppose once everyone's out and about, that number could change. And I guess I just want to segue and talk a little bit about the financial structure that you have here with the Nori and the NRT. Tell us a little bit about what those are, and if you're using blockchain and how blockchain is useful to this business.
Yeah, we're using blockchain. Nori's marketplace is there's two digital assets to the blockchain in Nori's marketplace. There's the NRT, which I defined earlier as representing the action of carbon removal, that service, and it's the quantity. So 1 ton of CO2 removed and stored for 10 years. Then there's a second digital asset, which is the Nori token. So the Nori token is, and it's Nori, all capital Nori. Yes, Shelly, that is the one that's mentioned. The Nori token is this cryptocurrency that can purchase the consumable NRT. So an NRT is created every time a ton is removed and then consumed as soon as it's bought and retired. So if you go to nori.com and you buy carbon removal, you'll get immediately a certificate that says your name on it or your organization's name on it, and it'll have the project that it was supported, the fields, because these are agriculture projects, the fields that the carbon removal happened to occur on, verification reports, etc. So it's completely transparent. So that NRT is consumed as like a commodity. The token is this currency. Part of our plans this year is to launch in the next, maybe 6 months, the Nori token. It's been a fundraising mechanism for Nori, but the point is that it's always pegged to one NRT. One NRT was always bought by one Nori token. And part of Nori's mission, some of the things, so our mission is to reverse climate change. I think I've said this, but some of the things that we have kind of put into our design is, how do we provide price discovery? Because it's not very clear how much carbon removal costs, how much people are willing to pay for it, etc. So our longer term goal is to provide this marketplace where buyers and sellers are able to essentially discover price for carbon removal. Right now it's kind of set at one price because there's like a lot of moving pieces, and we're just like trying to keep, we're kind of in our pilot phase. We're in our pilot phase right now. So it's selling at $15 per ton. But eventually it will not. It will change. And that token will be part of that price discovery.
As you grow the business, it seems to be like a very collaborative company working with Joro. I also saw that you're sharing your API with others. Can you talk about why you decided to do that and how that would work if someone was interested in using it?
In using what exactly? The API?
The API, yeah.
Yeah, so part of the many things that we are trying to do, we have this long-term vision, is to provide an API, an application program interface, which will allow any service provider, app, etc., to plug into Nori's carbon market and pay for whatever amount of carbon removal that they want and get that certificate automatically. So let's say you're an e-commerce site and you're selling your sustainable soaps. You're going to want, and then you have to ship it on FedEx. Well, why not offer your customers the option to pay for the carbon removal associated with that shipment, because they've already explained by purchasing through you your sustainable soaps that they care about the environment. So give them the option to engage in that at checkout, and with the receipt, they would get the certificate with their name on it and the project they supported from Nori. So there's no ambiguity there. That's the vision, right? And it can include a bunch of other use cases. Nori has launched the API pilot, meaning we're accepting applications. We're very much a lean startup. So we're very much in our customer discovery, customer development phase. We're interviewing people, seeing what their use cases are, their needs, their requirements, testing our assumptions, and then identifying what are the segments and the type of people we want to work with. So if this is something, anybody who's listening, that you're interested in, you can go to nori.com/nori-API. Also, it's available on the one of the 4 business pages there. You can find more information and a link to that page.
I like that you have the API URL memorized so easily.
It's my favorite URL because I keep trying to get people to apply, and we just launched it 2 weeks ago, and we've had numerous applicants, and so all day long I'm just like, oh, I'm going to read this new application and segment them and invite them to an interview, and it's really, really cool to see what people are saying that they find this useful for. And they're way more creative than we can ever think of. And it's nice to see the different use cases coming out into a roadmap for us.
Totally. Just as the role of a platform marketplace, you're sharing your API, you're sort of bridging different stakeholders. I'm curious, and I have a background in crowdfunding. I just wanted to hear from you what the role of platform marketplaces and carbon marketplaces are playing right now, especially as more and more individuals and businesses are getting interested in this. And you talk about this crew who's all working together. And for the carbon marketplaces out there, what is the role and why is it important?
I mean, this question is not loaded, but like there's complex answers to this question. I don't know. I think it depends on your personal perspective, right? It's like, how do you think government should interact with healthcare, right? Like everybody has their opinion. And so you have Republicans, Democrats, libertarians, whatever it is. So I will share my thoughts. And I see that there's a different variety of opinions out there. But what I'm seeing is carbon markets can meet the needs of different types of people wanting to pay for carbon. So there are individuals. Nori gets something like 100 transactions a month on our website, from individuals either paying $240 to reverse their yearly emissions or buying a ton. Actually, the most common thing we do get is people paying for a yearly removal. So that's kind of cool. Then we also have small, medium-sized businesses who they want to take action. They're like, hey, I can see that we're burning lots of gas in our restaurant and we want to do something about that. And they buy carbon removals from Nori. And then you have like big corporates, and then you have governments. And the question is always like, who should be paying for it? Should I, as an individual, be logging into Joro and paying for Nori's offsets, or going to Nori's websites and paying for Nori's offsets? Or, am I, as a small business, going to do it, or is the government going to make me do it, or is the government going to pay for it? I think many opinions on that. I'm just sharing, like, there are different ways to do this, and if we are to, as a globe, provide options and diversity, we should do just that. So Nori is a little different from the other carbon markets out there in many, many different ways. We're like this new cocktail of things in a way that people have never seen it before. We're like blockchain, we're carbon removal only. We do this FIFO-Q, we don't do project selections, and it's just like really cool, innovative ideas. And so we fit for like a certain segment of people. We're trying to democratize. We're trying to democratize carbon removal and give more access to individuals, small, medium-sized businesses, small, medium-sized enterprises. Whereas before, like large, because there's a big cost. I don't know if anybody's really familiar with like carbon offset projects, but there's a big cost to it, like to do the project, to get the project validated, verified, etc. And then what happens is you have big corporates buying in to these projects, which makes sense, and it's great for those project developers, but it leaves out the rest of the population that's not a large corporate. And your mom and pop coffee shop is emitting 800 tons of CO2 a year just with its tiny little coffee shop, and those all add up. So what do we do about those people? And Nori provides options for them, as well as corporates. We're happy to serve corporates, but we're trying to make it more democratized and accessible to more types of people.
Awesome, thank you. So what I want to do is I'm going to ask one more question, but first I want to open it to Q&A, just so people can sort of think about the questions that they have, send them into the chat, and we'll answer those after I ask my last question here. So my question for you is, you guys have had a really busy couple of years. You guys went through the Techstars Sustainability Accelerator, and you raised $4 million recently to help scale. what are you excited about in 2021? What sort of milestones are you looking forward to?
Um, yeah, a couple things. We're definitely excited for the API pilot, which I just told you we launched a couple weeks ago. And I'm wondering whether I should say this or not, but I'm going to go for it. What is it? Beg for forgiveness, not permission. But exactly. I think we're really excited to raise our Series A round within the next few months because we're seeing like a lot of interest since we raised our last time. And we're seeing that it makes a lot of sense right now for the things that we're trying to build. So, and then launching our token. So we're going to launch the Nori token and put them out in the public exchanges. So those are the three top things, and they're big things. They're like cross-company things that will affect us. And then we're also, I'll give a fourth thing. We're also road mapping new types of methodologies. So not just enabling carbon removal projects that are, regenerative agriculture, but also looking at where's the next methodology. So forestry, direct air capture, mangrove restoration. There's a ton of industrial, hybrid, or natural ways to remove carbon. So we're doing the road mapping for that. I don't think we'll launch a methodology this year at all, but we are actively planning and talking with different types of stakeholders in those different spaces and seeing like what makes sense for us next.
Lots to be excited about. So I do want to open it up the Q&A. I see we have quite a few people on the call, so feel free to submit into the chat box and we'll try and get through them. Let's see. What's the story behind the name Nori?
So chronologically, it was like we needed a name for our company. And so we did like mood board activities. Like what do we want people to feel when they hear of our name or think of our company? And we drew that comparison of the doom and gloom and like hope and agency. And so then we started focusing on that. Like, what are things that give you hope and agency or like feel good? And it was just like an exercise over a span of like 3 or 4 weeks of checking in and adding to this mood board. And the ocean came up because the ocean's very relaxing. Everybody likes to go to the ocean. And Nori was suggested, and it was cute. So it was a cute name. It also has significance because seaweed is a fantastic carbon sequester. So it's really funny because once we had a chatbot available on our website for about 6 months, and someone did come like, where can I buy Nori wraps? And we're like, that's not what we sell. As much as we love sushi, that's not what we sell.
That's funny. All right, I'll do a last Hail Mary to see if there's any more questions. Feel free to submit them. And I just want to thank you, Alessandra, for all of your time today and your insights and sharing the story of Nori. I think that both businesses and individuals have a reason to check out the site. Really excited also about the things that you have coming up in the coming year here. And we have a couple more questions. Thoughts on nature-based versus non-nature-based CCS technologies?
CCS, carbon capture and sequestration.
I think so.
Yeah. We're agnostic. I was looking for the word. It starts with an A. We're technology agnostic. So we're marketplace. If you are removing CO2 from the atmosphere and there is a verifiable way to see the work that's done for that project, we're happy to include it into the marketplace. It's just a matter of when and how, what that methodology looks like. So I think it's really important to note that our natural solutions that conserve lands that have been degraded are important for many other reasons, including co-benefits. So if we talk about regenerative agriculture, if we don't change the way that we're growing food, we're going to lose the ability to grow food for a growing global population, period. So why not fund projects that do two wonderful things? Just address climate change by sequestering carbon, but also restore the quality of soil and restore the ability of that land to grow food through future generations. That to me is so obvious. That's why my co-founders and I had selected and decided strategically, we're going to focus on agriculture, even though it's the hardest problem to solve, is like providing, or creating carbon credits from croplands, because soils and systems are all different. And it took us 2 years to work with experts on our methodology in our peer community to iterate on that. That being said, time is of the essence, and the speed and quantity at which you can remove CO2 from the atmosphere is super important. So things like direct air capture and more industrial solutions for carbon removal are also important. So again, to the statement I made earlier, knowing what's in your toolbox, knowing when to use it, and appreciating every single tool.
We all have a role. So if you're an individual or business who is looking for carbon removals, check out Nori. Just a couple of housekeeping items on my end. We have the Climate FinTech report available for free download. Just type that into Google. We're currently running climate FinTech programming in Switzerland, Spain, Singapore, the United States, and China. So if you're in that space and want to get involved in some capacity, please feel free to reach out. And thanks again for joining us today, Alessandra.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Take care, everyone. Cheers.